you want more of the conventional wisdom on sales and growing revenue, this podcast isn't for you. Throw away your closing tactics, tricks, and tips and learn what the top 1% income earners do to create results. This is the OnPurpose Growth podcast.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to this episode of the OnPurpose Growth podcast. Today's going to be a fun one because I've got an author of a sales book on with us, Tyler Menke, and I got his book, The Pirate's Guide to Sales, a seller's guide for getting from why to buy. And this is going to be fun. I've read this book. Tyler doesn't know this, but as I was reading it, I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, this guy's talking about me and my life. So this is just going to be great because from the way I sell, the way I've grown up and learning sales is spot on. It is this book. So Tyler, thanks for being on, man. And before we get into your background and everything, how the hell did you come up with the name? Like, what's the background of the name, man?
Well, I guess the title I really wanted was already taken, the subtle art of not giving a fuck.
Oh man, you missed out on that one.
No, in all honesty, my thoughts were that no one needed another selling method. We'd all had plenty of those. And, but on the other hand, no one, by my estimation, wanted to hear another individual sales guy's perspective on selling. We all have our own unique style. So the Pirate's Guide, meaning these are all the best ideas pirated for the book and other people's ideas. And there's some of mine in there too.
And I love the way that the book was written. I love how you talk about a topic and then I forget the term, you wrap it all up or you bring it all together, which was phenomenal because for salespeople, we got to get like, what did I just listen to? Right. So that was great. And it's real. This is real raw stuff that it's not theory. You're not somebody who is, just academically talking about this. This is real sales stuff that works. So I'm really excited to talk about this, man. So before we dive into the book, why don't you give everybody a little bit of your background and then we can dive right in to the book.
Yeah, sure. I think giving a little background on myself will probably put the pieces together for why you got some of the thoughts about the book feeling like I wrote about you. Because I'm a seller first and foremost, but I never really saw myself going down that path. So I grew up on a farm. I had an interesting upbringing because one side of my family, my mom's side, were all farmers, and I grew up on the farm. And then my dad's side were all orthopedic surgeons, radiologists, all in the medical field. And so I actually had wanted to be a doctor and unfortunately struggled mightily with school. And it wasn't till actually after my MBA that I was diagnosed with some learning disabilities, but one of which is ADHD. And certainly not every salesperson has true ADHD like I do, but I think a lot of us have some of those same attributes sort of ingrained in our DNA.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I went on and chose business after basically flunking out of pre-med. And then lucky for me, after 2 years in my first B2B sales job, I landed a medical device job. And I saw that as a path to marry two loves, the love that I originally had for medicine and then the love that I had learned to appreciate in business.
Oh, that's great, man. That sounds like an interesting journey that a lot of people have been on. Maybe not all the pieces, but it kind of happened all jumbled up that way. So that's one of the things that I love about you in this book is that it's real and raw. So,
never goes as planned.
What'd you say?
Nothing ever goes as planned.
No. But everything works out perfectly, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
So let's talk about the book. What really led you to write the book?
Yeah. So, having been diagnosed later in life with ADHD, I sort of had a lifetime of coping skills that I had, found this new reason or there was something behind my struggles with learning. And I was put on a low dose medication and had and I read a couple books on ADHD to do some other things. And I just became a hyper learner. I was like, I want to relearn everything that I had so much, trouble learning throughout life. So I began reading books and listening to books as I drove. Us salespeople, we have a lot of windshield time, right?
Yeah.
So I was taking notes. And then another thing that I had realized is that, I remember sitting in several, training classes for sales, spin selling or challenger sales, and thinking, there's no shortcut. There's no silver bullet to selling.
No.
You just have to experience it. And for that matter, it in the challenger sales, they're talking about the lone wolf. Do you remember that?
Yep. Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
And the relationship seller. And there's all these different types of sellers out there, which that part is true. But then the book's called The Challenger. So then what does everybody in the class want to be?
Exactly. Right. The challenger. Right.
and everybody's not that way. So, I wanted to write a book that took all the learnings that, that I had found in the best business books out there. And then I also wanted to accelerate my own learning. And so I started reaching out to the top salespeople I could find around the country. It's been probably 3 or 4 years now, and started interviewing them and collecting the data. So it's a combination of research and interviews with top sellers. And then, as you alluded to, I wanted to make it very interesting. So there's a lot of raw stories. There's a lot of, very authentic, true stories to try to keep it moving along.
Yeah. And as a non-diagnosed ADHD, but lifelong salesperson, it kept my attention. Right. So it's about 140 pages long.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, until I got into reading, it was like I would read 2 pages and be like, what did I just read? Right. And I couldn't read for long periods of time. The first time I picked up this book, I read half of it.
Really? You're not just lying to me.
No. I swear to God. I swear to God. Right. We're recording this. Everybody has access to this. I read half of that book, and I don't do that. I chop books up. I mean, it's not 2 pages anymore, but I read half of that book because it's like, one thing is like, oh my gosh, I've been exposed to that and that works. I exposed to that and that works. I exposed to that and that works. And what I love about it too is there are some things in there that your everyday salesperson may not actually think about and use, like I'll just call it the continuous improvement.
Lean Six Sigma.
The Lean Six Sigma, things like that. We use a lot of that in our sales strategy and sales process stuff because the thinking is so valuable. So it just kept drawing me in, man. I mean, I literally read half of it in one sitting in 3 hours or 2.5 hours. Let's move on because
No, that's great to hear. And one of the things that I've always appreciated in my favorite books, for instance, like one of my favorite books in the past few years was Hal Elrod's The Miracle Morning. Was just the authenticity that shined through in the book. And, I just wanted to make sure that came across. So I'm glad to hear that you thought that.
Oh yeah. From a reader, it absolutely did from this reader. So let's talk about the book. Tell me a little bit about, tell the listeners or the watchers, what's in it, and let's go over this a little bit because this is exciting to me.
Sure. Well, the first thing that I think might be interesting to people is that, I am not an author. I would consider myself a left-brainer. I'm all covered in tats. But I am not somebody who is a trained writer. Mm-hmm. And, and I'll put it out there, I reached out to the big five, we probably all do this. We're like, oh, we'll get this published by the big five publishers. They don't pick books of first-time authors, even if you have like a English PhD.
Right.
You have to have a huge network. And so, rejection after rejection. And I didn't care. I just kept going. But the one thing I would tell people is, if you have a passion for something, there are ways to get this done without going through the big publishers. And so one of the things I did was hire a book coach to kind of help, get me started on the right foot. And I think that made a big difference. And then the other thing is just keeping a log or a notepad of all the ideas that you come across. But, that's something that I wanted to share is that, anyone can certainly do this. And I hope that others do, because it's a lot of fun and you learn a lot in the process. But the book is meant to be, just as the subtitle says, sort of a framework for buy sellers, for getting from why to buy. And I think Simon Sinek had it right, although not in a ton of detail, in that once you understand why somebody would want something, then you can sort of deliver a value proposition that fits.
Exactly. And you even, and I don't want to jump ahead, you even talked about that value prop. So we'll talk to that because we'll talk about that at some point, because I love your perspective on it, because it's not a magic bullet, and it stays within that framework. So that's interesting. So you talked about a couple of things like emotional connection in there, and this kind of goes with the why, and then building around belief. Talk to me a little bit about that and why you put that stuff in the book.
Yeah, so I think that we're in an age where just bringing value to someone, that's a very canned term. So I think that people want authenticity, and you can't be authentic without understanding their world. So a big part of, emotional connection and delivering value proposition and building belief is truly doing the homework. I think that we all, and I'm still included in this, but we all vastly underprepare. One of the stories in the book is about a sales guy's encounter with Elon Musk.
Yes,
when I read his autobiography, it really hit home because, as the story goes, this guy was just hammering Elon Musk for a year with all these really good value prop messages. And he finally got the meeting, and Elon said, "You got 1 hour." He put him on a jet, flew him to New York. The guy, traveling, tromping through the snow up to Elon's office. And he sits down and he says, I just want to get to know you. The typical relationship builder type rapport building stuff. And Elon looks at him and says, well, it's good to have met you. Now get the hell out of my office. And the meeting was over in less than 1 minute. He sent him packing. And he said, it just shocked the hell out of me that somebody would spend a year trying to get in front of me, and they came in asking how they could help me instead of telling how they could help me. And so I think that's what it comes down to is you have to go in understanding their world and how you can bring value.
Yeah. And I think on top of that, and maybe this is embedded, not saying that you're not saying this, is that there's the hustle narrative is an incomplete process, right? Like all salespeople work hard, but just working hard, like hustling on that guy is not the full picture. And two, just going in there and saying, well, tell me more about you and let's get to know you is a shallow, inauthentic way to approach it, right? Because it's just words. It's not actual, there isn't enough depth behind it, because you actually really need to understand somebody and start the conversation from that understanding. I mean, am I going in the right direction?
Yeah. And I think when you speak to the continuous improvement or the Lean Six Sigma that I talk about in the book, whether you're in printer copier sales or medical sales like myself, it's important. I liken it to the undercover boss. So the term in the Lean Six Sigma world is go to the Gemba. It's a Japanese term that basically just means get to the source or get as close to the product as possible. And so that's what the show Undercover Boss did. You know, the CEO, as you move up the corporate ladder, you get further and further away from the customer and those on the ground floor. And you lose sight of the true value adds. And so one of the things I always do is, and it's amazing how many people will, let you do this, is I try to come in before I have a big meeting and do what I would call an observation. Try to understand every part of their business as possible. So that when I sit down at that meeting, I can say, I met with your staff, or I met with, your workers. I met with these people, and this is what I saw. This is what I observed. And my goal is to be able to bring value.
And do you find that going through that process allows you to ask better questions?
Not only ask better questions, but I think that you can also anticipate objections, because how many times in hindsight do we walk out of a meeting like, well, I didn't see that coming.
Exactly.
And had you been on the floor or been close to the product or the customer, sometimes you can sense those objections and be ready for them.
And you may even find out something that the person buying doesn't even know. Right? Like they don't even know, it's being that Gemba, is being that close to that product. So
yeah, sometimes you're too close to something, just like the CEO, or a lot of times I'll reach out to people outside of my industry and see what they're doing, because sometimes you're just too close to the situation. So
I'm with you, and as sales professionals, we need to understand buyers are getting really, really smart. Not that they weren't before. It's just they're interacting differently, and we have to come in with a really, really deep understanding to serve them, instead of like the guy we were talking about, Elon Musk. He was just coming in to sell him something, not to serve him.
Right. Well, and what I've noticed is that everything's getting bigger. So our customer gets bigger. And everything, becomes more and more important, because if you're all shooting for the same pool of customers and there's more competition, then you damn better separate yourself.
Oh yeah. Right. Just by the growth of the economy, we get commoditized, right?
Yes. And I think all the salespeople that I interviewed in the book had one thing in common, and that, that they may have totally different sales styles. Like one guy was more of a high energy, knock your socks off with energy, and the other guy's more of like an introvert. And they're both equally successful in their trade, but they have their own little unique style. But one thing they both had in common is that they're innovative. They didn't just say, well, it's always been done this way, we're going to continue to do it this way. They've always been looking for ways to innovate and be sort of a, entrepreneur within their own sales world.
Yes. I love that. So what are the ways that, what are things in the book that people can read and learn to help them innovate?
Well, one of the chapters where I probably had the most research and it had the biggest impact on me was, it's a chapter called Sales and Oars. And a lot of it comes from, Daniel Kahneman's work. So if you're not familiar with him, he wrote Think Fast and Slow, but more importantly, he won a Nobel Prize. So he's pretty legit.
Yeah, that's legit, right?
Yeah. But, just like the title of his book, Think Fast and Slow, he talks about how we have, we're ingrained with two decision-making tools, our intuitive or gut reaction, and then our more analytical side. And so in that book and in the research for decision-making and targeting, I think where I landed is that you need to combine both that gut reaction and that more analytical side. And I even have a targeting tool that I've developed that will be on the website to help do that. But basically, the more you can just sort of align what you initially think based on experience, if it's based on experience.
Right.
and combine that with base rates and numbers, the better you get at decision making. So that's something that I think was extremely helpful for me.
So it's not like, how there's a lot of people out there that will just go with one or the other, right? So I'm a gut kind of person, or I'm the analytical kind of person.
Right.
I remember reading that part, and it's great because it's, you start talking about how to help these two things live together, kind of like the, I don't know if it makes sense, like yin and yang, right? Like they
Mm-hmm.
balance, you have to balance them out for them to work in harmony. And you can't just be too heavy on one or heavy on the other.
Yeah. And so a lot of what that talks about is when to use what system and how to combine them both for big decisions. So, the first half of the book is Voyage prep, which is essentially all planning and preparation from self-branding. There's a chapter on that, to organization, which is goes in depth about, a lot of best practices that I had learned, growing up with ADHD, and also interviewing Peter Shankman, who's a very well-known entrepreneur. And then it goes on through planning, prospecting, targeting, and decision-making. And then the second half of the book shifts gears, and it's the 6 points of sale from opening to closing. And that's a collection of interviews with salespeople that have amassed a 30 President's Club wins amongst themselves.
Wow.
So
the real deal.
They're all very different too. Very different personalities.
Well, and that's what I love about the book, is that it's like you were talking about the challenger sale, right? It's like, hey, you have all these different types of sellers, but then everybody's trying to be the challenger. That's going to work sometimes. It's not going to work, but people aren't being who they are. It leads you towards inauthenticity. And what you have in here is showing different shades of everything. So somebody can, pick and choose within those frameworks what works for them. That's what I love about the book.
That's exactly right. Like the hope would be that you can take bits and pieces away from the books that are included in the topic of conversation around behavior change and influence and stuff like that. And then you might take some bits and pieces away from the sales styles of those interviewed, and maybe it will accelerate your learning process. I know it accelerated mine tremendously, just by organizing and all. And I suspect, anyone from CEO on down to brand new salesperson could pick this up and read it, and it would accelerate their system building, their own system.
Exactly. So we talked a lot about the beginning of the book, and you just referenced kind of the end of the book. Let's talk more about that. So what are some of the things that stuck out to you that you were thinking, like, this is really important to put in from that, opening to closing of business?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that I think, unlike what are all the big sales movies out there, like Glengarry Glen Ross, Wolf of Wall Street, unlike the movies would portray, I think closing is I could be wrong when I say this, but based on the research I found, I think closing is sort of overrated. I think the opening is more important. What's interesting? Yeah. What's interesting is that I don't really ask to close anymore. I plan to get to a place where I can tell them the next steps.
Yes.
And what I've found is I'm not saying I'm telling them the next steps in like an authoritarian way. We've made agreement along the way to what they want, but no one, myself included, wants to say yes to something and then have to do a bunch of work to implement it. So right. I get to a place where I'm mapping out the next steps for the customer, and more of a tell and less of an ask. And I think that's appreciated, particularly when you're aligning with the goals that they want to see happen for this change. And the best closer, that I could possibly find, he's won President's Club 7 times in a row. He's been a top rep like 3 times. And that's what he does. He's like, the shift was once I bring the right value to the customer and I do enough preparation and planning, I plan to tell them the next steps, not ask.
Right. It's just a natural kind of flow to the conversation or the process, because I've seen people just not tell them the next step and lose the sale, and they were ultimately waiting for it. Right. It was, and then their natural next step is, okay, let's talk to the next guy. Right.
Right. And the other thing that, I noticed with all the people interviewed was that, tell me if you remember this or this was the case for you, but when I first started selling and I think back, I sucked. We all did. But what's interesting about it is you're so focused on being busy. And really what you're doing is you're just trying to be busy to avoid the fear of failure and the things that are actually going to work.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm putting the right words around that, but
I understand what you're saying, because it happened to me, right? You're just busy to be busy, but not necessarily busy being effective.
Yeah. And you almost can see early on what are the best opportunities.
Yep.
But instead of going all in on them for fear of getting it wrong, you instead try to take more of a shotgun approach. So one of the things that I noticed about all the top salespeople interviewed is that they were very strategic, very visionary.
Mm-hmm.
They really sought to find the customers that they thought would be willing to receive the value that they had to offer and kind of cut the fat. And I think there's just something to be said for, having been in the end zone a few times and having the confidence to land the bigger fish.
And it's when you're starting out, or even, there's salespeople that have been in it for a while that are afflicted with this. They just want to create as many opportunities as they want. And the way I learned this, and I will never, ever forget it, from a mentor of mine, he said, Bryan, you got to figure out how to spend more time with the right people and less time with the wrong people. And sometimes that meant not spending time with anybody at all, right? Like finding those right people. And that's what I hear what you're saying, right?
Yeah. That's where the Dead Seas part comes in, what to do with that downtime that we all have. And then from a targeting standpoint, the targeting chapter is called the cannonball approach, on purpose to try to counterbalance what a lot of people do, which is obviously the shotgun approach. So that's one of the things that certainly has taken me a long time to learn, and I'll probably continue to, find ways to hone that craft. But I think just being a good decision maker, being strategic in mindset, and then finding ways to, create a target pool that's not maybe 100 targets, but 10, depending on industry.
Well, and this is my big beef, you want to call it, I don't know what you call it, with big corporate sales. And this is why, for me too, the average VP of sales, director of sales is only there for 18 months, is because they're more focused on activity than they are effectiveness.
Right.
And I've heard salesperson after salesperson who was in the top 3 that were getting yelled at because he didn't have the activity, or the person didn't have the activity. And it's like, well, I'm producing the result. What's it matter? Right. That just drives me nuts, because that goes back to what you were talking about, like early on. It's just, hey, I'm just doing things to do things, not doing things to do the best result.
Well, and I think if you took your top 20% or your top 10% of your sales ranks, oftentimes they don't have the most activity. But I would venture to guess that activity is something you can control, whereas there's, always variables outside of it that you can't. And so I think that that's one of the reasons that happens. But also, my experience has been that top sellers want to stay off of a naughty list if you're speaking to calls or something like that. Yeah. And so they're going to make sure they enter them, but it actually might not be what they're doing, what they're truly doing in the field.
Right. The numbers, and you're you're pulling my chain, because this goes back to, if you look at all these Lean Six Sigma and these continuous improvement, you're giving your system of sales bad data. And now you're not being able to produce, you're not going to be able to use that data in the right way, because the people are what's the word I'm looking for? I'm having a brain fart. They're rigging the system.
Right.
Right.
Well, yeah. And that's a big part of Daniel Kahneman's work on decision making, is that you can't just go off of base rates, because that's where statistics will lie to you.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you go in seeking to find something out of a statistic, chances are you're going to find it. So if you say, okay, we need this many calls and we're going to track calls to revenue, and you analyze it a certain way, eventually you're going to find the answer that you're looking for. So that's where it comes into taking in, experience and factors that are out in business right now in your business world, and combining it with the statistics.
Yes, exactly. Well, and kind of jumping back to what you were saying in regards to an evolution of spending more time with the right people and less time with the wrong, and going from 100 to 10. I just think it's, it's a constant process for me too, because it's so backward to how ingrained things are in us, right? We've been conditioned to think this way. And is that kind of how you're working through it yourself?
Yeah, I remember I had so I'm a goer, I wake up early and I like to fit, 10 pounds of shit in a 1 pound bag. And so
I love it.
One of the best pieces of advice I got early on in sales, and I've been blessed to always have good, sales mentors, sales managers and the like. But one of the best advice I got early on was, I want you to work from 8 to noon. I actually had a manager tell me this.
Really?
I want you to work from 8 to noon, and I want you to spend the entire afternoon planning. And so I did. And I found that I was, having better calls in those 8 to 12 hours, and that I was spending the afternoons to plan. And that was sort of when I started to see the light bulb. But I think it would be an interesting thing for people to try to say, okay, all you have to put in your calls, right? If you have to do 6 or 10 calls a day in your industry, I'm not saying don't do that, but to say I want 2 appointments a day that I'm going to over prepare for. I'm going to be ready. I'm going to do all the right things. And then, just route in and around those 2 appointments, and then spend the afternoon planning for the 2 for the next day. And sort of expanding on that, almost going small first, and then expanding upon that as you go.
Well, don't you think, I mean, you've done this, so it's not even think, I think, but it's when you go small and you learn how to do it, that's when you can just grow it a little, and then you're good at that, and you grow it a little and you're good at that, right? Isn't that how it works?
Yeah. And I think we just become more effective. I mean, one of the things about people with ADHD, we're procrastinators, and it's because if we put the pressure on ourselves, we'll actually get it done, and get it done quickly. And so, that's the thing. It's like, if you have too much downtime, or if you're just trying to be busy, you're going to end up being less effective. And so, you'll often see, I've seen it all the time in my career, where you've got, mothers that, their husband also works, and, maybe they don't work as many hours, and they're the top salespeople.
Mm-hmm.
They've just become, I think women in general are better multitaskers than us men.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I don't think it's about the time you have. I think it's how you spend that time.
Yeah. And it's figuring out how to get better at that, and just improving in time, and not expecting to be perfect right off the bat.
No, I mean, that's the thing that I wish I could do for people, is just, it's a tough road in the beginning, and there's probably some great salespeople out there that gave up because they had a really shitty first boss or a really shitty first job. And, it's always a roller coaster, no matter how good at it you get. There's always going to be those ups and those downs.
It's like we're ingrained in this, ambition and achievement. So you actually never get to in my opinion, is you never actually get to that goal. It's the journey, right? And the journey's got ups and downs.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're a funny bunch, us salespeople.
Yeah.
We come off super confident, and then behind these eyeballs, there's like a bunch of fear and uncertainty and doubt. And you'll get all the way to the top of the stack ranks, and then all of a sudden you start having this feeling, how long is it going to last? Can I do it again next year? You don't ever live in the moment.
Yeah. Well said. Because you even talked about that in the book, right? You talked about that at some point. We're the most on the outside, to the outside world, we're the most positive, happy people. But then there's this dark side, negative side that's going on all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the more, I talk to other people, I wouldn't have vocalized that stuff or put it in the book had I not realized that we're all sort of the same way. I just think it's ingrained in our DNA, and I think that a lot of people struggle mightily with that early on. And if you don't have a good mentor or a good coach, you might give up. So,
yeah, one of the best mentors and coaches I ever had taught me a basic. And I still work on it today. He taught me how to make assessments and assertions. And that sounds so basic, yet the negative self-talk is a really bad assessment and a really bad assertion. It doesn't matter the data that's going on, right? It's like you can
I like that.
You can be at the top, right? And he taught me about narratives too, right? I mean, this is a sales coach teaching about narratives. Like these things aren't even like on the board in Challenger sale or whatever. So it's right. It was really interesting because it's a basic skill that is ungodly powerful.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. I mean, I think I opened up the book by saying that I never had wanted to be in sales, and I feel so blessed that I went down this path because I think it's such a powerful thing. I mean, behind every great product and every great company and all these things that change the world, there's somebody who had to get that message across. Mm-hmm. And we always just think of the salespeople that do it poorly. And that's why we, we grow up not wanting to be a salesperson. That's all I had envisioned in my mind. Exactly. But it can be done right, and you can sell the right way and bring value to people and change the world.
Literally, I interviewed the CEO of a CRM. It'll come to my name, and he actually his goal, pipeliner CRM. His goal is to change the narrative on salespeople and call them peacemakers in the world, peace providers, because they're solving problems and they're taking chaos and creating peace. And I just love that. It just stuck with me, right? So I like your angle on it too.
No, I mean, I love that as well. And I've been trying to think of a term, and I haven't come up with one yet, but I like that. It's interesting. It's just once something gets a bad connotation, mm-hmm. You sort of want to, and it's not that it has a bad connotation for everyone, but I think that, there is a narrative that could be shifted or changed so that people are actually out there trying to do this in the best way possible.
I agree. Right. And somebody said something the other day too, that there's a narrative out there that says 70% of salespeople don't hit quota or something like that. And then he said, well, if every buyer brings in 3 people to quote them, 2 are going to lose, right? So there's somebody's always going to be the 30%, right? So it's a misunderstood narrative, right? I mean, there are a lot of average guys, but it's a bad piece of data, right? Just like we were talking about, it's a bad piece of data. You're seeing what you want to see with it.
That's exactly right. Well, and on the flip side of that too, I'll do a lot of like mentoring and coaching of people that will reach out. You know, there's something about medical sales. People think they want into that. It's perfect for some people and not for others, but they'll want an in, or they'll want a shortcut, and just like sales, there's not one. One of the things I always tell them, I'm like, look, if somebody told you, Bryan, next Friday I will offer you $1 million, and all you got to do is give the best presentation to 5 people, how would you prepare? You would prepare your ass off.
Yeah, right.
And the reality is, if you're any good at selling, you can make $1 million in 5 years. And so all you got to do is beat out 4 other people usually. And people don't prepare like that. And I don't think they prepare for their sales calls in the same way. You know, might be $1 million account, and you know there's 2 other people going in there, and you just plan to do just enough to what you think would win.
Well, and that just goes back to, I think this is in the same line of thinking of working from 8 to noon and then preparing for the rest of the day. It's what you just said is inside that type of thinking.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's how effective you are, and understanding you cannot bring value to every customer, just as you cannot help every person out there. You know, I'm somebody who likes to do, you know, charity on the side. And you know, one of the things that I've had to learn the hard way is that they have to want your help. People have to want your help, and not all our customers want our help. And yet we're trying to help them. So identifying those that you can help and are willing to receive help, and then focusing your time there will make a huge difference.
Yeah. It's, you know, it's about effectiveness, not how many hours you actually put in, and just that. That's what really bugs me about this hustle narrative that's out there, because people are just working themselves to death and doing a lot of ineffective things. A buddy of mine, Scotty Schindler, he's on LinkedIn. I don't know if you crossed him. He's in Australia, and he posted a video within the past couple of days about perfect practice, right? Right. And you could, it's like the 10,000 hour rule, right? If you spend 10,000 hours mastering something and you did it the wrong way, you mastered how not to do it right. 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 So it's incomplete thinking. You can't just do, you have to figure out what are the right things to do, spend time on that, and then do those things.
Yeah. I mean, that's brilliant. And I think that there's so much to that. And it's just, and those are the things you can't shortcut, but you can certainly accelerate your learning process if you just continue to push the envelope and learn from as many people as you can.
100%, man. You know, I'll pick up books and learn anytime, right? One of the things I love about this podcast, to be transparent with everybody, I'm not shy, is I get to learn something every single time, right? From somebody who's really good at what they do. And I pick up nuggets all the time, right? So I do this to learn, I record it and share it with people, right? I mean, it's phenomenal.
I feel the same way. I mean, with every interaction, you know, with people like yourself, you know, you pick up all these nuggets, and you know, you'll steal and pirate what works for you, and it will start becoming your own little method.
Yep. So, you know, what does this whole system in this book look like as we wrap this up?
Well, you could almost say that I baited you, because we sort of followed the narrative here.
Oh, okay. Let's recap.
I mean, I kind of planned to open with, you know, a corny joke about the subtle art of not giving a fuck, for shock value. And you know, wear this stupid shirt, you know.
Oh man, I love the shirt, man.
Not looking all buttoned up and buttoned up and salesy. And then we sort of got into where I came from, and I wanted to make sure I got out there that, you know, I did not set out to write this book for myself, nor did I think that anyone, you know, gave a damn what I had to say about selling or wanted another selling method. The goal was to take a bunch of ideas, put them in one book, and help accelerate or shorten the path that, you know, could be taken to keep learning. And so that was sort of the belief process, and then there's the value proposition. And then when you do it the right way, you know, the close is really just, you know, do you want this for yourself? I mean, if you can't be a learner like you're talking about and continue to learn from other people out there, you know, that's on you. The rest is on you. So that's sort of my process, is that, you know, and it's worked for me, is that you overplan, and you try to guide and shift perspective, and get to a place that you can sort of set out a path that the customer is willing to follow.
That's great, man. So, well, I appreciate you being on. This was fun. Everybody, go get the book. It dropped today. So, you know, today's the 8th, but November, when's the official launch?
So the paperback became available early on Amazon. So it's here today. You could buy it, and then November 14th is the official launch, and that's when it'll be available in all the other markets. So
perfect. So everybody, go get this. I swear you will love it. This is one of the best sales books I've read, because it's not a system. This is real life stuff. And if I can read half of the book, you can probably read the whole book all the way through. So, so I appreciate it, man. So before we leave, why don't you share with everybody how they can find you and get a hold of you and get more information on the book?
Yeah, so I'd like to keep this learning going. So I would tell people to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and if you have any good ideas or things that, you know, we could share with the rest of us, please do so. And then, you know, you could find me in addition to LinkedIn, the website www.thepirateguides.com, or just Google the Pirate Guides. But just find me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. And for everybody listening or watching, don't worry if you didn't write that down. It's going to be shared here, wherever this video or audio has been shared. So we'll have some links for you guys. And I appreciate, you know, everybody tuning in. I appreciate you being on, man. This was, as I said, this was fun. And for me, everybody can find me on LinkedIn too. It's linkedin.com/in/McDonald Bryan. And thanks for tuning in to this episode of the On Purpose Growth podcast. And we'll see everybody on the next one. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the On Purpose Growth podcast. Let us know what you thought in the comment section. For more from On Purpose Growth, go to onpurposegrowth.com. Subscribe here at BLTV for all of our content, including the daily Learn About Law podcast, Seize Your Business, Making Real Estate Fun, and Logical Logistics podcast, brought to you by O'Flaherty Law. Thanks for listening.